The second World War II video I'm making, and this time about the Holocaust. Now, I'm going to have to warn you that some of the images you're going to see are really quite disturbing. If you feel you're not up for it, you feel that this is not going to be something you want to see, then by all means, don't watch this. But I do think it is important that everyone should. So, Second World War, the Holocaust. What the idea is that you understand why and how the Nazis persecuted, vervolgd, and tried to basically exterminate the Jewish people. Now, anti-Semitism, we talked about before, this is Jodenhaat, hatred of Jewish people. This had a very old history in Europe, more than in fact 1,000 years old. The church, especially the Protestant church, and Martin Luther had always been of the idea that the Jews were responsible for the killing of Jesus and therefore were basically God killers and deserved to be exterminated off the face of the earth. There had been all sorts of conspiracies in the Middle Ages that, for example, Jewish people would capture children, Christian babies and kill them. This was called the blood libel. This was never true. This was always rubbish, but it was an excuse for people to persecute Jewish communities in Europe. Now, this particular hatred of Jews basically was, I think, the most extreme it's ever been when Hitler became Chancellor of Germany in 1933. As we talked about before, Hitler wanted to show the Germans that they were the victims of a conspiracy or a victim of the world, and that all of these economic problems could be solved by him. And most importantly, that it was somebody's fault. This was a key idea of fascism. The Jews and the communists could be blamed for everything. In 1935, he set in place something called the Nuremberg racial laws. This basically said that Jews and Germans were different. They were different species almost, and they could not marry, join together, and more importantly, the Jews had to live apart from these people. If you remember, we talked about the idea of purity, Sauberkeit. Hitler was obsessed by this idea, and he genuinely believed it, that the pure Aryan race needed to be kept pure from this tint, from this pollution from these lesser races. So, if you have a look at this, this would mean that, for example, in order to be German, you had to have absolutely no trace of Jewish blood in you. People in Germany would actually have to prove before they got married on their certificates they didn't have Jewish grandmothers, Jewish great-grandmothers or grandfathers. Now, the Nazis did this whole kind of thing in phases. Phase one, this was the idea of making sure that the Jews were basically put down, humiliated, and shown to be this other race. This was very useful because, of course, if you weren't a Jew, this was something you could unite around. People all throughout history have found this is a very good way of getting people to support you. Find someone who you can bully. The most famous events with this was the Kristallnacht, which happened in 1938. Jewish businesses, Jewish shops were attacked and supported in these attacks by Nazis themselves. Now, it was done apparently in Paris. A German was killed by a Jew. This basically is the excuse that they need. Joseph Goebbels, who is the Minister of Communication and Propaganda, basically said, we're going to revenge our colleague. And Jewish businesses were smashed and destroyed all over Germany. The property and synagogues was then also looted. All of the wealth distributed then to Germany's. Now, phase two then, once there was this idea that the Germans had convinced people that their Jewish neighbors, their Jewish friends were apart and they were different, now they wanted to separate them purely from other Germans. So Jews then were basically forced out of business. They were forced out of government. If you were a German person, you shouldn't shop at a Jewish shop. Jews had to have little stars on them to identify who they were. And this led to phase 3, where the Nazis said, now the Jews are so dangerous for the purity of the German people, we're going to move them into ghettos. Now, this is not a new thing. Jewish ghettos happened in Venice and other parts of Europe beforehand, but this was far, far worse. Thousands and thousands of people were put into tiny, tiny living conditions. They had no running water. It was extremely unhygienic. Families were forced together. There wasn't enough food for everybody. This meant that there was hunger. People were literally dying to death, starving to death in these ghettos. But of course, this wasn't the end solution. Now, the ghettos were ringed off. Jews were not allowed to leave these ghettos. And any Jew who did was arrested and could be killed. Now, if you then have these, obviously the Germans thought, well, if we're having these ghettos, we're going to have something else now. We're going to actually move these sources of pollution out of our cities and into concentration camps. These were considered much more effective way of containing the Jewish population. And if you're in a camp, of course, these camps were far away from other places. While they were in ghettos, you still had the chance to sneak out. Well, it was a risk to your life, and some people could still help you. In concentration camps, this wasn't the case. Now, the next bit are images which are really terrible. If you are easily shocked, please don't carry on watching these. But if you want to learn out more, these are important things to see, so please carry on watching. So, now was the idea of phase 1. They wanted to kind of get rid of the Jews. So, weirdly enough, most Jews were not actually killed in concentration camps or in the ghettos. Most Jews were killed by what was called Einsatzgruppe. These were people, especially in Poland, in Lithuania, in many parts of Eastern Europe, which were just soldiers who would go to Jewish homes, Jewish villages, and simply murder people and put them into ditches. Men, women, children, all of them were murdered. In this way, nearly half the Jews who were killed were simply killed like this, soldiers going house to house, finding families and murdering them. For B was then the Eindoplossing, the idea that the final solution had to come where Jews had to basically be systematically taken off the map of Europe. So this is where we come to the gas chambers and the death camps. Zyklon B. So this is something which was ironically discovered by a Jewish man. And Zyklon B is a type of poison gas which reacts with air. And this was the way that the Germans decided was not so the Germans, the Nazis decided was the most effective way to kill large numbers of people. If it came in contact with air, it would then become a gas. People would be forced into these gas chambers, the Zyklon B would be thrust down in them, the gas chambers would be closed up. Now, to give an idea here, this was not a quick death. It took people 38 minutes or so to die, usually, during these, with Zyklon B. This would be a chamber packed full of men, women, and children slowly dying to death from a terrible, terrible poison gas. These are pictures from the gas chamber, which gives you an idea of just how terrible it was. All evidence that this happened was destroyed. People were taken into death or extermination camps, taken through the gas chambers, and the bodies immediately burnt. Jewish inmates were the ones then responsible for burning and cleaning up the bodies. Everything of value was taken from the people, their toothbrushes, their glasses, their shoes, their prosthetics, their wooden legs. All of these were taken and then recycled by the Germans for the war. Now, life in these death camps. So, can you think of a concentration camp or a name of one? These should be quite famous for you. My guess is that the one you thought about was Auschwitz, but there were many others. All of these camps here usually were in Poland, out of the way of Germany. Jews were taken from different parts, from Brekelung, from Westerbroek in the Netherlands, from Paris. They were transported on trains and into the occupied Polish territories to these death camps here. The death camps were a place to kill people, and as many as efficiently as possible. Now, this was Auschwitz. You can see here the efficiency was that you should be able to take large numbers of people and murder them as fast as possible. What would generally happen is that people would arrive by train. They were separated out at this point. If they were considered strong enough to work, they were put to work basically in the camp, helping destroy the evidence and burn the bodies. If you were a twin, or if they thought you were useful for medical experiments, they were separated out and they were experimented on by doctors such as Mengele, who wanted to look at the effects of pain and torture on human bodies. As the war ended, and it looked like the Red Army was going to start coming through these areas, all evidence, or the Germans anyway, tried to destroy all evidence that this had ever happened. When the Allies came in and actually looked at what had been going on and found the evidence, many people refused to believe it. They could not believe that people would actually do worse things. And in the end, 6 million people, well, Jews, were killed. Now, this is just Jews. Hitler also killed homosexuals. He killed Slavs, Soviet people, Poles. All of these people who were considered not pure were, according to the Nazis, unworthy of life and had to be taken away. Now, we would hope, of course, that this would never happen again. Unfortunately, that's not the case. In Iraq, in Yugoslavia, and in Rwanda in Africa, this thing has happened again and again and again. And we need to be aware that this might not be the last time this happens. That's all for now. There are other movies and films you can watch about this. Thank you for listening.